Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11, and of course we are playing with very many mods, including the beta version of German gameplay augmentation. Now, we are currently battling from, well, let's call it the Arctic Circle. Don't know exactly where it goes through up here. To North Africa. North Africa currently is just some fighters and bombers. I've now set my bombers to start bombing this area here to hopefully give the Italians a little bit of a help. And we have some fighters to intercept. Of course, our other big battle area currently is Yugoslavia as we head towards Greece. Yeah, Iraq. Now, a few of you have commented about some of the influencing, or other nations influencing themselves towards us. The now no longer existing nation of Switzerland is specifically designed for its because there's some AIs the modders can get to, but its diplomatic AI is designed to never get in anybody's faction. So if it starts getting too close to one, and there are some events that in TRE that make it closer to Germany, if it starts getting too close, it'll start aligning towards the Allies. If it starts getting too close to the Allies, it'll start aligning itself towards the Axis. It sort of floats that way. I don't, and that's specific to Switzerland. Other nations, I don't know, and I haven't dug in to look at them. So we may very well have influencing that. If it's Italy, it's probably more likely that it's Italy is actually trying to increase its influence here. Oh, we want diplomacy. So we may see these guys. Now this is Italy and the United Kingdom battling each other. Did we look at Uruguay? No one cares enough about Uruguay. Found out recently, I think around somewhere between 1936 and 1938, Germany built a major dam in Uruguay, and still there. Still there, and a fairly big lake that's set up for hydropower. So, I just thought that was interesting. Some of the projects that were going on. Oh, no, keep it the wrong one. No, so a few people are being influenced by Italy. So we'll see. So sometimes these things may mean that they're coming in. I'm far from saying that like South America is not coming in. Like I say, far from it, but they may get their diplomatic AI may be saying, "Oh, you're getting too close too. Let's back off." Now, sometimes they may want to be closer to us than the Allies, which would then allow us to a little bit easier for us to then go in and influence them. Okay, Army HQs have advanced the wrong one here. Army HQs, and it does say that it is too far in advance, so we will stop that. Well, yeah, that's the wrong thing. We just got so many HQs right now, though. I know I don't have to accept the HQs. The reduction in delay between attacks is a really important thing. Of but I'd like some more 1940 text just to burn through those things faster. Orange and transport plane. I don't know if I want to increase the cost. Well, time to build at least. Okay, well, we could do this. That would. And then craft flotilla marine activation. I think we are underway. Replenishment, which is down here. We are doing that. Yes, so that means we're doing everything we can appropriately right now to do that. Well, okay, human wave and yeah, combat width. That would be good to reduce. Reducing the combat width means it's easier to stack units without. Oh, as you may notice, what I did is, and yeah, we're gonna. Okay, let's go. We'll get to that in a second, I guess. Okay, where are my long range air transports here? Did shift them over to this pile, but I think I want to. Oh, that's too far away. Cancel. Well, let's look at our supply situation here. Supply mode. Okay. Rebase to there. Maybe I should have. Well, it won't hurt to do this as well. Okay, well. Air supply right into there. New air supply right into there. Well, okay, what I did is, so we have Edward von Kleist, Edwald, whatever. And the reason he's stuck here is because this HQ, in renaming it, was removed and didn't remove him. And he's now the program sees that as the HQ unit. So we can't transfer him to anybody else, but what we can do is disband the unit. And what I did is I just went in and refired the event after slightly editing it, just so that it didn't have any of the penalties of it manually, so that we now have battle commander that we can attach somewhere. Just sort of maybe kind of remember that you might want to be careful about some of those things when you accept to, like when you some of these guys, if you're changing HQs. Nothing's perfect. And life ain't fair, and be very glad that it isn't. Oh, you need to be attacking. You need to be attacking. Can't let Rommel have all the fun. Hauser's a higher ranking general, so he took over. Hauser is the rank, I think, to command a corps right now, but via the event he got put in charge of a division. Okay, switch. Keeping the reinforcements flowing. Okay, we've had a battle off this coast of Galatia. And what I did do here is, well, not those guys, I guess. Those are the German submarines. I broke that big, huge stack of Italian submarines up. That's here into stacks of 3. I think 3 is optimum for not being spotted. Just to give, and I'm not the best person on mechanics. Just please remember that in any of these discussions here. But I do know a little bit, and hey, if you know better than me, and I'm not saying this is any sort of challenge or whatever, but if you do, please post corrections below. If I'm saying something wrong, I'd much rather have you correct it below, and at the end of the episodes or whatever, scroll down and see the comments, because there are interesting corrections or comments or whatever. So always check that out. Okay, see, visibility here is 6.5, and let's here you can see that he doesn't have a, oh yeah, his picture is not there, or never had one. Okay, visibility 70. Okay, so he is so much easier to be seen than this submarine. Okay, so, and I wanted the other German subs that are here, I want to just see what their current visibility is. 6, so a little less visible. The more visibility a fleet has, and I do actually think that both of these, since they're both here, they get sort of combined. But I'm not absolutely sure about that, but I'm pretty sure about that. So the more visible subs are, the more likely sub hunters are going to find them. Now this looks like it was a battle with just a heavy cruiser, which probably has very bad sub hunting ability, or killing ability. So they've gotten away, which is good. And so if you have a huge stack like this, unless you're going to really try to want to battle it out with the enemy, sink the enemy, defeat the enemy's fleet, you don't want to keep them in a big stack. So mostly you just have the generics 5th sub navy. So 3 is about sort of optimum in the sense that it's big enough that it is going to take on a lot of convoys and escorts, because sometimes we'll get notifications that we see a convoy that's too big and we can't do anything about it. So there's sometimes you'll get that. So 3 is sort of right in that sort of sweet zone between hard to be seen and can do enough damage, as well as to some degree soak up some damage. I don't think, and again, I don't know the details of all the combat maneuvers. Navy, I'm sadly lacking more so than some other ones. If you just had one sub, I think the likelihood of like a bunch of destroyers concentrating on that one sub and killing it versus spreading the damage over and letting it get away is a little better. So you have that. So that's just an idea that you don't want to have these in huge stacks. Now historically, Italy at the start of the war had I think it was the largest, definitely the largest in the Axis, but I think the largest submarine fleet in the world. And I would say that was partly because submarines, quite honestly, are ultimately a lot cheaper than big surface warfare ships. Now, before World War II, people did not, and I can even military and naval thinkers did not understand the influences of air power, or what they maybe understand what they would be, the influences of air power on naval combat. You have like Billy Mitchell, who eventually gets court-martialed, and I don't know all the details of that, but he was an Army officer who was part of the Army Air Corps. Nothing I need to pay attention to. In the U.S., for insisting that that air power was where things should be focused and would be able to sink fleets. Now, of course, a Navy made up of battleships filled with battleship officers doesn't want to hear this. Of course, they do sink a battleship in testing. Boom, sink it down. They tried to make it so that they couldn't sink it, but no, they get sunk. I have all that correctly. An old out-of-date battleship that was due for scrapping anyways. This was, because I didn't look any of this up beforehand and haven't looked at it for years. I'd say early 30s, maybe late 20s. I don't know. You can look up Billy Mitchell, the court-martial, and some of the stuff and get a little more detail if you want. And if somebody wants to link to that in the Wikipedia thing, that would be cool too. So so he foresaw what was going to happen, and basically you get to the point that battleships are no longer what rules the waves. And it just isn't. It's air power. Now that doesn't mean battleships aren't useful. Okay, I still think America should have. Well, just one is too few, because one is never in the right place, and two, submarine was like at this time in the 1940, it was 1/3 at sea. 1/3 getting ready at sea, and 1/3 of the crew and whatnot was sort of taking a break between operations. So if you had 30 submarines, it means only 10 of them are operating out in the Atlantic at any one time. So if you have in a modern Navy, if you have one, well, in a realistic sense, between being deployed, and it could even be for a year, and because it isn't World War II every day of the year for whoever, and obviously with fleets you can have them out here and deployed, but they still got to come back to some ports a little bit, and whatever. They're not necessarily all going back into major refit. But with the U.S. currently, you're deployed around the world. You may be out for a year, maybe just 6 months. But then you get sailors come back. Then you get a lot of time off. 3 months or something or more. Could be very wrong about that. But that's generally sort of, I think, is sort of the idea. That you're just basically on vacation. You go back with your family. I'm not saying you don't do anything, but it's basically family time. And then after all of that, then you come back to work, and you spend, and again, this I'm sure it changes and is different for different stuff. You start re-exercising. It's sort of like relearning your job, but not so much that you forgot how to push the buttons or tie the knots or whatever it is. I'm not saying that, but you sort of learn to work together, because there's going to be changes of crew, people promoted, demoted, retiring, ship transferring to other ships, new people coming in, so that you have a working up stage before you're ready to go again. So you cycle through it, and during that working up stage, obviously you have more time at home than you do when you're deployed around the world. Now, I'm sure this is different. Oh, I don't know. Let's go for the Dutch Navy here. They may get weekends off most weekends because, hey, they're not going, they're not very far from home. They may actually tie up at their home every night. Who knows? Small country, small navy. But so it's different when you're talking about a great world power. So I still think today the U.S. should have at least 2 battleships, if not 4 battleships. Now, I understand why, because of the the Wisconsin that the turret blew up on, and it was a lot of old technology and whatnot, and I know that. I mean, they had updated a lot of technology, but and they can now make much better lower profile hulls, much better armors, and all kinds of stuff like that. But they really, really, really should make a run somewhere between 2 and 6 battleships. Make a production run and design them to be capital in several ways. One is the term is like durable goods, capital goods, that they're going to last for a long time, like 100 years, literally. And just with the idea that you design them to last that long, not that they're going to be in war for that long, but just they'll be useful for 100 years until they're like sunk in combat or something. Obviously, if you have a war sooner than that, but that they're there with, designed to be upgradable in electronics and other type features of it, because battleships are still really important in my opinion. Navies do not understand this, just talking about they don't understand the influence of air and missiles. But carriers, let's see, you can sort of kind of armor the deck of carriers, well, you can, but still they are not really armored vessels. So if you start throwing nuclear weapons around and get sort of kind of close to them, you can sort of shut down carriers. You don't have to, you have the CWIS, the close-in weapon systems, the phalanx and other similar sorts of things like that. You don't have to actually get a missile to come in and actually hit a carrier to take it out if you're going to use something like a Tomahawk missile that has a nuclear warhead on it. So, China, if we were to go to war with China, they've got a cruise missile type ballistic, high velocity, short range ballistic missile. Fire it close enough, you can take out a carrier. Not that big of a problem. Now, if you have a battleship, now obviously if you get the nuke right on it, I'm not saying it's going to be fine. But if you get a sort of kind of near it, and you've sort of kind of figured that, hey, there's nuclear weapons, so let's, put a layer of lead, or, lead's a toxic chemical, but put a layer of something to help protect against radiation internally. And you've also angled the hull and do all kinds of neat stuff to make it more survivable. You can still have a ship that's floating and working and fighting, and it may not even be fighting for long, but it may be fighting for a while. And a battleship, unlike other things, carries big, heavy guns, and I don't think they've successfully set up a intercept system for 16-inch or 18-inch or whatever solid projectile or very dense projectile shells coming in at you. I'm not saying we can't intercept them and hit them, but a laser interceptor, I don't know if it's going to do much to it. And a missile interceptor, I don't know how much it's going to make it tumble, and even if you can hit it. And it gets increasingly harder to hit something the faster it's going. So pushing it out there out of a gun tube is going to go a lot faster than most missiles. Definitely a lot faster than any cruise missile, that's for sure. So, and most people live in the littorals. The littorals is, what is it, like 24 miles or 30 miles or 16 miles or whatever of the coast. Now, Paris is sort of somewhat unique. It is sort of for Atlantic country. But I think that does sort of include London. But a lot of capitals around the world, we can look at Stockholm, even Leningrad, if it was, well, Stalingrad today, St. Petersburg today or something, you know, that's obviously not the current capital of Russia, but, you know, a lot of major cities are near, most people live near the coasts. China is increasingly moving its population towards coastal cities. Again, that may not be more than half of the eventually Chinese population, because they have a lot of internal as well, but still, it's a lot. And you got, you know, Hanoi, that's sort of in the littorals kind of thing, and Saigon, obviously. So you can affect a lot of combat with gunfire, and big, heavy gunfire. And in our day and age of radar, and we'll call it fairly cheap missiles, to be able to intercept other incoming aircraft, incoming guided missiles of some sort, it's going to be harder and harder to stop heavy projectiles coming out of it, like a 16-inch shell. So it would be a very good thing for the U.S., and the U.S. can't afford it. Now you go, oh, you're spending more money on the military than you're spending on poor people needing health care. Well, if you don't have a military, you can't protect the people from the barbarians that are just going to come in and decide to take it. Barbarians can look like Nazis, can look like communists, can look like any group of people. They can be from a highly developed country, or they can be from an entirely underdeveloped country. But the military is the most important thing. Once you have that, then you can do other things. Without it, you're just hoping and praying, which isn't a good government policy, that somebody else will protect you, because people rob banks. People are never going to stop robbing banks. So that tells you some people will get in power in countries and decide to rob their neighbors' banks. It's just going to happen. So like back to the point is the people didn't understand the influences of. I'm also not saying the U.S. should have fewer aircraft carriers, or aircraft carriers aren't important. They are more important, but they're not exclusively important. So Billy Mitchell and a few others are seeing what air power is going to do. Now, air power didn't work out quite as devastatingly destructive as they thought it was going to be. If you look at a lot of stuff coming from H.G. Wells, who was a massive progressive, and if you look at some of this stuff, he's something of I don't know if a statist, maybe we should say. I was almost going to go fascist, but I don't know specifically fascist and that kind of thing. But he's very much of a statist and whatnot. But they very much, and I don't think he was in his books and the movies based on him, was fear-mongering in that he was trying to whip up the fear of air power. I think he just saw air power as being super devastating. Now, of course, Germany felt a lot of American and British air power, but that was really huge efforts, and compared to what they sort of thought, shall we say, the percentages of people dying in cities, shall we say, even those, there were still lots and lots of people left alive, compared to if you look in the late 20s, early 30s, that it was just, 60 airplanes or 80 airplanes or whatever were going to come over your city, and 60% of the people in the city were going to be dead as they flew away. I mean, it was that sort of kind of a, we're all going to die, and it's just, the air power was just going to be this, who needs armies anymore? Well, you need some occupation force, but there's going to be air power, and air power is going to spot the armies and just obliterate the army. That was sort of kind of some of the people's feelings. Now, the people that were actually doing it, maybe like Udet, who really promoted dive bombing, knew that they weren't just going to be able to obliterate armies. But, of course, they did think, and it does have a massive influence on the battlefield. But the land, it didn't have maybe as big as impact as they thought it would. Now, navies, again, partially it was just denial, but partially it was, they hadn't experienced it. early 20s and 30s, bombing wasn't that accurate, and that kind of thing. Now, so the Italians built all these submarines, and I don't know if any of you've noticed, but Italy's in the Mediterranean. And maybe, I don't know, again, and it may have changed, because I understand that much of the sewers around the Mediterranean run into the Mediterranean, so it's turning more into a large toilet, which isn't doing any good for the environment. But generally speaking, especially back then, the Mediterranean was considered a very clear ocean with, I know there are some deep spots in there. I really do know that there are some very deep spots, but a lot of it is very shallow, and it's very clear. And when you're sitting on a ship, looking out at the ocean, looking for a submarine, you can't really see the submarine because it's under the water, and it's really hard to see. And so the Italians built all these submarines that, without really knowing and just from various feedback, will go marginally acceptable. You know, they weren't. I'm sure they weren't like super great. Yeah, I'm sort of talking in what they were in 1940 when Italy goes to war. Now, they may have been building them in 1932 that are still being used. Well, they may have been the state of the art in 1932, but that doesn't mean they're state of the art in 1940. So I'm just going to go marginal, just as a safe guesstimate of their capabilities. So I'm not trying to say that they're bad submarines. They're just, you know, they're okay, maybe. And somebody who knows better can post something on this. Now, what they didn't either take enough time, didn't realize, didn't figure out enough, that when you fly over the submarine at day, and it's under the water, you can see it. Especially if it's like at periscope depth. You can just see the submarine. It's just there under the water. Maybe a bit of a shadow, but it's just there. And you can sort of like go, hi, we see you. And you can bomb it. Not necessarily depth charge it, just bomb it. Because it's not that deep, and you drop a bomb on it. And depending on the fusing of the bomb, bombs can... generally, the impact on water, I think, will detonate a lot of bombs. But you can have it fuse so that it delays milliseconds or a second or whatever. Sometimes they did that for a lot of naval bombing so that they would hit a ship and penetrate as deep as the momentum would go before blowing up. So that they'd also do that for like bunkers, you know, so that hopefully its own pounding will either get it through or partway through the concrete and then blow up. Not just milliseconds, because you're not thinking it's going to be around very long, but just enough so that it sort of goes in, and that way it makes a deeper, bigger hole. And so you can do that with, and again, I don't know the technical details, but you can do that so that you bomb a, well, the Italians are trying here. See what happens when when they're no longer afraid of being invaded by Switzerland? So, yeah, I know they have invaded Malta before, even when Switzerland existed. But so you can bomb a submarine that's very near the surface, because even if the bomb doesn't like contact the submarine and blow up, it can just be a few feet away from the submarine, you know, if it's near the surface, and the shock wave from the bomb, as well as, I don't know how good the fragmentation will be traveling through the water, but it's a theoretical possibility, can really sort of mess up submarines. So you don't even have to have specialized naval or submarine attack weapons like depth charges. And I know a lot of U.S. Coastal patrol aircraft carried bombs instead of depth charges, because depth charges, they're useful, and they did carry them from aircraft, and they did drop them, but it's sort of like how, you know, you set them at a generic depth, because either you're currently seeing them, or, and this is we'll get to in a second, or you saw them and they dove, so you know that they're sort of in there, and they can only be so far down, because it takes a while for submarine even power diving to get down to wherever. So I don't know, 30 feet or 40 feet, or I don't know, but you can just sort of so you drop the depth charges where you think the submarine might be, and they go down and they blow up, and you can maybe do that. But the U.S. also did a lot of bombs because this gets back to the point is traditionally submarines spent most of the day or most of the time on the surface, only submerging to attack. So this was part of the Italian plan, was to sailing around on their submarines. They've got lookouts. As soon as and they're much smaller, so they normally would see a ship before the ship would see them, and then submerge. And now once you submerge, you're going a lot slower than the ship. So maybe the ship's going away from you, but you just submerge for safety and let the thing go away from you. But if it's maybe coming towards you, you try to get into if it's an enemy ship, try to get into the path and sink it. Well, if you're tootling along on the surface in the Mediterranean, and then you dive, you're still being seen. Now, some of the areas on the Mediterranean, coastal plains, meaning coastal plains. I don't mean land. I mean plains under the water. Coastal shelves, I guess, would be the appropriate term. Like this Bay of Toronto, I don't know, but it may be fairly shallow in that it may only be 100 or 200 feet or something like that. I don't, and then, or maybe it's not. I don't know right offhand. But some of these areas are, if you were to lower the ocean by 40 feet, you get big land masses showing up. So there are some areas that the submarines just literally can't really maneuver and get down and hide without being seen from the air. Because you don't really, unless you're just actually going to try to settle on the bottom, and then if they sort of know where you are, they can pound that spot if they're on the bottom. But even then, they may be casting enough shadow to be seen. But even if it is sort of deep enough to get away from not being seen, you started out on the surface, so they sort of know where you are, so they can come in and attack you. And of course, aircraft can vector in destroyers and other light anti-submarine vessels. So no one really, and the Italians didn't figure this out until the war really got underway, and well underway, that they could be seen. So they had a big submarine navy that wasn't very effective because they never effectively cleared out the ability of the British to operate air operations. And so the Italians didn't do well. Now, I have read some books on the British in the Mediterranean. One is a historical fiction book, but trust me, the submarine and the captain and the crew were very busy and did a lot of stuff that was probably a lot more than any one submarine did in real life. But basically, all of the operations that I forget the author in the book, but all of the stuff is all based in reality, in that some submarine crew did this at some point during the war. They just boil it all into one submarine, and the submarine does a lot of interesting adventures. So you're not jumping from crew to crew to all patrols are interesting, none are boring, and whatnot. So the British, I know, had a policy of, it's daylight, we go deep, we stay out of coastal areas that we can't be deep in. Because like I was saying before, you can potentially, depending on the type of bottom, want to go in and settle on the bottom. But you don't want to be going through the water, because you don't have like little portholes in your periscope doesn't really work underwater. You don't want to be tootling along the ocean and then run into some bottom piece of the ocean in a submarine. So if they know that in this region, well, we have 50 feet clear, that's the bottom of the ship, the submarine, 50 feet go down clearance, and we're not going to hit anything else. They don't want to go 52 feet down. They're going to stay at 50 feet, the bottom of that ship. Now, again, you might want to try to rest on the bottom, but they're not going to want to maneuver below 50 feet if that's what the chart says the minimum safe depth for maneuvering. So the British, did fairly well, but they had very strict procedures about staying away, and so they would come up at night to charge their batteries. and to travel great distances and do that. And then daylight would come, they would slow down, they would try to be, oh, maybe off of here or off of somewhere that there was the ability to go deep enough. And they would very much, because they knew they weren't going to get any more power during the day, try to use minimum amounts of battery power to sort of hang out there and wait for an Italian, coastal convoy or something coming around. And as they did, they would then send off their torpedoes and then try to get out of there using as little power as not. They knew they had enough air, because that's sort of a known constant, but. You go fast with your engines on electrical power and use it up real fast, or slowly all during the day and get more economy out of it, because the more resistance you get, the quicker you burn up your electricity. And so they had all that. So the British actually did it a little bit better, and they were also much fewer. So it's just a fewer kind, as opposed to trying to flood the zone with it. Now, so the Italians and whatnot sort of get wind of, or figure some of this out, and they do send a bunch out, and they do come to Bordeaux. The Germans for a while try to integrate them into some of the Battle of the Atlantic, but the Italians just quite honestly aren't up to it. And it's a combination, I think, of the technology of their submarines, their whole command and control attitudes, and their training levels. It just the Germans eventually thought that they were more trouble than they were worth, which to a point comes down to is the scarcity of resources, because I have a hard time understanding some things. More trouble than they're worth. Okay, yeah. The Italian Navy is probably the best trained and officered service in the Italian of the three Italian armed forces. The air, not that good. And I'm not saying there wasn't some good pilots, and there wasn't. It just really, but overall wasn't that good. And also part of that is just outdatedness of their equipment. And the Italian army, you've heard me go off on some of the stuff and how god awful it was in the Italian series. But the more I've been learning, the Italian Navy, partially because it's fairly small, so they were able to get some of the better people in there, doing a little bit better. So they may not be willing to retrain themselves, so they may just be fairly poor. But what I try to do is, when I look at a game like this, and when I try to, if you will, reimagine what I would do in World War II, if you will, try to say, I've got this tool, how best to use it. And so the Italian Navy, or Submarine Corps, very well may be a Navy, or Submarine Corps not suitable for the North Atlantic anti-convoy duties. But you'd still have all kinds of other things to do with it. The Turks wouldn't let them get into the Black Sea. I don't think you could transfer the vessels effectively by cutting them apart and rebuilding them in the Black Sea. It's just too much work. I think some of the German submarines that were put there were shipped over in pieces before they were built and assembled. There was a small amount of some of that going on, assembled in Romania. But you just find, sort of turn them into a coastal command, if you will, an observation force or something. I don't know. But so that's sort of the story of the Italian submarines. They didn't do so well. The Italian Navy got sunk at Taranto, or at least, 3 battleships did. Oh, they're trying to take out Kleist with HQs. Well, no, they gotta real unit involved. And that's sort of tools that are useful. I know many of you watch the Italian series. Something that was meant to be a, I don't know, 20 episode wait for the next Black Ice to come out, and it turned out to be, actually, in my opinion, a really good series if you haven't watched it. And it sort of died here trying to fight the Soviets, and how it just, you know, we can talk about they needed better piercing abilities and all that stuff, and they did to win, to effectively. But how do you take those exact same units with those exact same levels of techs on them and stacked each one of those divisions, if you will, with 2 German divisions? It would have been so much more effective, because those German divisions would have been, you know, whether they're infantry or armored or whatever, would have been the main hitting force, and the Italians would have been just sort of the extra to push over. And that's sort of kind of how I kind of look at that kind of stuff, so that you may not, you know, on their own, they just may be unable to be effective. But had you had effective support for them. We won there. We're coming to port. We want to take Sweden with as little damage as possible. So you come into there, because we're trying to puppet them. We'd rather have a better off puppeted ally. Okay, well, we've taken Belgrade. I don't know where the Italians, are they coming to get ready to go to war with Greece or something? Well, let's see, you come around this way too. And I did drop in this fleet that was, you know, stuff here. I'm looking at them. We just sent. We knew we were planning to go to war, so we sent all of our all of those cruise ships over to for a Mediterranean cruise. And a few days before the war broke out, they all went into port in Italy. And then we also have some more of these guys here, which don't really have supply yet. Enforce conquer on Yugoslavia. Okay. Now, I think, well, I think we're going to have going to be very shortly to let us re-divvy up. You don't need to go there. You can come down this way. You never made it into that battle. You can come down that way. Yep, we're going to lose a few provinces, it looks like, as soon as this sort of cranks over. Well, while we have the leadership, we're going to lose some of it, I think, once we form our puppets. Just a teeny bit there. U.S. have declared unlimited national emergency. Land lease now. Well, this has gone back from being part of Greek to under Australian command, it looks like. A little more brown than the British. Okay, well, these guys are bombing. Hopefully they're doing good bombing. The British helping the Italians out. Continue our rush for Greece. Yes, and then we lose a few. Oh, this is up here. Oh, you're already there. You need to get in. Okay, we've got drop tanks, so stop that. Okay, Falkenhurst, you, the Stugs, and the additional infantry attack. Okay, drop tanks. That is very useful. That'll increase a lot of our fighters and others' range. I think it's what, air systems, one and done. Yes. Well, let's do that. We want to keep building up our quality of our air operations. Okay, well, you know what we should be doing here is, now that we have that, where's Rommel? There's Rommel. Rommel, come over here. We're going to send you to North Africa. Yeah. Because we can now just, you don't have to invade when we have the shipping. So I would have sent guys sooner, but we didn't even have any shipping. Can't use. Well, the mountain troops, they're going to be useful fighting in Greece. So you guys keep moving forward. We'll have plenty of troops to go into Greece. You guys keep moving forward as well. Probably should strategically redeploy them, but for right now I just wanted to keep moving. Yeah, well, we lost those provinces, but we'll let those guys go. They want to take this now. This is their last. Well, they even have a Klugliga Flappenpensens. Whatever. Air HQ there. Ski troops. Yeah, you can head this way too, maybe. Okay, now we're gonna get ski brigades. Cool. Okay, which I do know that's a one and done, but we can do asymmetric warfare. It's gotten rid of the penalties that it had before. It previously had penalties to attack, which I didn't quite get. But I like this better. And probably on a Hearts of Iron scale, where we saw this the best asymmetric warfare, was in Finland defending against the Soviet attack. You know, large columns of tanks and trucks and whatnot moving along the roads, and then often ski warriors, but any type of warriors or soldiers or whatever coming along and ambushing them and that kind of thing. Yep, we knew we would because they were going to occupy that. No, you just support the attack. Bulgaria. We would give them a sure, Bulgaria. We want you nice and friendly and in our axis. That way Romania will stop feeling it needs to defend its border against you. Yeah, we are. Or they are, either way. Aligning themselves already. Defend against the Soviets and any sort of naval invasion, maybe, but beyond that, no. Okay, guys, keep moving in, keep moving in, keep coming down. Air supply. Yes, we're losing some provinces, but I really don't care that much at the moment. We sort of care about this, but we'll fly in. Well, maybe we'll do so now. We only got those left. Okay. Everybody else is flying, are they? You can come up to here. Keep moving, but it'll be more important to keep these HQs coming south. Why don't you have any commanders? Well, you're not going to be in combat right away, so let's give you one now. we have another version of Totenkopf. I'll stick that down here. Now we have two versions of Totenkopf. We're going to kick out the Heimwehr. That's just too slow. And we'll leave Bach in charge of it. Let's give it to the Panzer Corps. Now that's a decent unit, not maybe great. Well, our fighting will be down here, so let's put them down here. It's going to be a little while before we go to, yeah, you can have that division, before we go to the Soviet. Von Schell, yeah, he can have that. Reading his book slowly. Well, a book written based on his lectures. He didn't actually write it. Though I do believe he gave the lectures in English. They were to the U.S. War College or some similar such organization. Okay, Vichy, France. Carrier Air Group wants our permission to actually use Carrier Air Group. Well, since it's one, I'll let you have it. I don't know why it wants a Carrier Air Group. Does Vichy have any carriers? Why would I want a Carrier Air Group instead of just Naval Air or something? Naval Air would have been short, yeah. Love you to have a bunch of Naval Air. Now, Hungary wants our permission and technical expertise for 3 units of medium bombers. Well, that's absolutely sure, yes, because 3 units is not too much for them. I sort of, you know, don't want to choke their production lines with useless or not very useful items. We might as well come down here. Okay, Von Kleist, well, reinforce that attack. Okay, tank destroyers have advanced. Good. Tank destroyer 42, stop that for now at least. Let's come over here and we will, well, let's do armored. Figured there might be more here needed. They're still organizing up. You guys come down that way. Good. Okay, hire SS und Policeführer Nord. Appoint SS Obergruppenführer Fritz Wetzel as SS Higher Police Leader Nord. During 1939, Wetzel wrote the book Celebrations of the SS Family, Die Gestaltung der Feste, which described the holidays to be celebrated, along with how married SS men and their families should celebrate them. This book, written by Wetzel, described how the Uli stretcher should be used. That is I think, if I'm not mistaken, a sort of four-sided, primitive-looking lantern that you put a candle in it, kind of thing, which was a Yuletide gift by Himmler to the SS. The book helped Himmler with what he called the Kultur, which was the recreation of German pagan religion. That's a picture of Wetzler. That's a picture of a copy of his book, and that's just an SS patch. This is all, I've recently read Hitler's Religion, which, how do I put this? The author very clearly says, and it's a rather academic author, that it's very hard to determine Hitler's religion because Hitler says all kinds of things. And even the author realizes that it's hard to pin down. And the author also is very clear that what may be true, say, in 1924 of Hitler's beliefs may not be the same beliefs that he had in 1944. And we're talking religion here. We're not talking political or knowledge of history or whether he thinks he's going to win the war or whatever. I'm talking that this is purely a book on his religious beliefs. So the author acknowledges that it's very hard to pin down Hitler because Hitler lies. I don't know if anybody noticed that, but he signs treaties and then not upholds them. But he also says things to people and does different things. He lies all the time. Hitler is a liar, and I don't just mean, he broke some major treaties 2 or 3 times, so we call him a liar. No, he's just a constant liar throughout his life. He will often tell crowds what he thinks they want to hear. He will, in private conversations. Now, I'm not saying he's lying in the sense that my crowds are bigger than any other crowds in history, or you know what that is about. Or he's lying about, well, I could jump 10 buildings or something. No, he's not lying about personal achievement, but just about what he thinks will do in the future, to what different audiences that he's with. Now, so the author is very clear about this, and the author is very clear that he's contradicting himself, because some of the people look at, I don't know, again, maybe something like a speech that was sometime, I don't know, before 1926, in which he describes himself publicly as being very much of a Christian. And that's often quoted, including by the atheist who is blaming, Christianity for doing World War II, or, for being Nazis and other things and all this stuff. But it is very clear. And so one thing is you can, and he also lies in his book, Mein Kampf. One thing you can very well understand and can discount is Hitler's public statements, because Hitler is trying to get an end goal result. So Hitler was very much, especially in the early days, very much trying to suppress public knowledge of the paganistic beliefs. In this book, they talk about when he was in conversation with Ludendorff's wife, who started up, a monologue, what I sort of do here, about how it's so important to spread these neo-paganistic occultists' beliefs, and that she and her husband were very much, because Ludendorff, who, very famous World War I general. I know most of you know that, and whatever else. And then he was sort of semi-reluctant, maybe, involved in the beer hall putsch. I don't know how much of that. Yeah. But so that's sort of who he is. But he and his magazine sort of move off into the fringes of further fringes than standard middle of the road National Socialism. So that's what he is. So that she was, and Hitler sort of shuts her down, and no, we can't do this kind of stuff and everything, like that, because Hitler wants to win elections and knows that in Bavaria, because this was fairly early on, that Bavaria is still very strongly a Catholic region, and if you are coming out as a occultist or whatever you want to define it, and the author is very finicky about titles and terms, and sort of gives some general descriptions of what he's talking about, but meaning he's sort of separating neo-paganism and occultism and pantheism and other things, and I think he's overly separating them in Hitler's case, in some of these cases, but because very much that with National Socialism, and he's very correct, there is no one viewpoint on religion, and there is almost no one viewpoint on anything in National Socialism, because you get contradictory people's political philosophies. You get somebody who's rather red, like Goebbels, or you get somebody who's not, like Goring. Okay, you get, and they're both very high up in the party. So, and they both are sending out mixed messages. So there isn't like one book or one document that we could point to, and even that includes Mein Kampf, that we can point to that this is National Socialism. And that is part of why I'm still trying to study and understand what National Socialism was. Maybe a lot of people, well, we know what Nazis are. Really? I don't think most people do. And the one thing that they talk about that, and this author, I'm forgetting the author's name, talked about scientific racism and how important that was to the Nazis. And this is and this is also what he talks a lot about with Hitler, that Hitler believes that all this racism is very scientifically based. And which now our current scientific understanding is a lot of hogwash, a lot of hooey. They just didn't understand things back then, because we now understand things much better genetically, and we can test things genetically much better, which pokes big, massive holes in Nazi racist theory. So that's an important thing to note. But and I'm also recently read Eric Kurlander's book on Hitler's Monsters, and it has multiple meanings for the title, but you also find a lot of Nazis coming out discrediting science because it's all Jew science. Science is Jew science. I mean, it's almost, science is sort of Jew science to them. And these I'm talking about are the thinkers. I'm not talking about your average Nazi farmer, your average Nazi worker, or even your average Nazi guy in some sort of NSDAP regional office somewhere. I'm talking the thinkers within the, or even average Nazi, party member. I'm talking about the sort of the thinkers. They were rather dismissive about a lot of scientific elements by thinking that it was Jewish influenced. That doesn't mean that they don't believe in scientific inquiry. That doesn't mean that they don't think that some of the reality is reality, but they I'm trying to how to put this. They don't believe that everything is easily measurable, easily replicatable. I didn't know we had this guy here. I knew we were going to get a bunch of these things, and we're probably going to end the episode and continue from here. Ah, Lish Division. Okay, cool. We're getting ready for 41. Lish Division could be cool down here. Past Greece. So we'll send them down there. So that, and the author, so that, but they also very much believe that science is, as we sort of talk about it, and that is part of a, I don't know if Jewish conspiracy is the right term, but influenced by Jewishism, and that they have certain conclusions, and they're trying to find evidence for, trying to find a non-controversial. Okay, let's just say scientists believe that the dinosaurs were killed by a meteorite impact on the Earth. So a scientist or a group of scientists go out and try to find all the evidence that they can to prove that theory. And while is their sort of, and I personally believe that was a massively contributing factor to why dinosaurs were extinct. I don't know. I wasn't there. But it's as if a scientist were going out there and everything they put in their books or their papers or whatever is factually correct as they as they go and measure layers of ash settlement around different parts of the planet that they figure are from this meteorite impact and put on there, but leaving out any contradictory evidence that might push in a different direction. So it's not necessarily anything is wrong in it. They've either dismissed or haven't looked at or contradictory evidence. That is sort of what a lot of the Nazis think of science, because a bunch of it is coming from outside of Germany, a bunch of it's coming from inside of Germany that is Jewish influenced, so it's Jew science. Now this other author sort of dismisses some of that because, and sort of talks about how occultists were persecuted under the Nazis. Well, the Nazis are very clear that there's scientific occultism and there's chicanery or charlatan occultism, as well as, which they don't maybe talk about so much, anti-Nazi occultism that is real. And that's where you get into the Jews and their occultism, Kabbalah and other things, that they think it's occultist elements that are operating, that are real, that are operating against them. And so a lot of this, and so this author's looking at Hitler's religion, and there was a bunch of secret speeches of Hitler. And by secret speeches, it wasn't that it was secret, is that they were unpublished, and a lot of them were made during the war, or I don't know, a few of them were made during the war to large groups of junior officers from the Air Force, Navy, and the Army, and presume officers of Waffen SS. He was aware that there were 1,000 or 2,000 people in the audience. These, like, cadets and junior officer types, that he was giving some of these speeches, and a bunch of them were dealing with, you should be super harsh on your enemies in the East, and, sort of, without quite saying it, but sort of that we're fighting a war of extermination. And Hitler, but these speeches weren't, they were, I guess, written down or people copied them down, but they weren't like published in newspapers, and they weren't put out on the radio for everybody to hear. They were for a specific audience. And this author sort of looks at some of that stuff, and he includes some of his stuff. Now Hitler, often throughout his career asks for divine help or people to pray for, some sort of divine help, or calls for the blessing of God or whatever throughout his career in his speeches. And I truly believe that that is very sincere. But it is not the God of the Jews, which is also the God of the Christians. But the salient point is the God of the Jews. Now, because the author comes out that Hitler's a pantheist. And basically, as this author has defined it, as that God is nature, nature is God. The natural world is God. It's all sort of universal sort of kind of stuff. And Hitler definitely times at some of these things talks about gods don't just do miraculous things. You sort of only sort of, gives you the power, if you will, not gives you the power to do them, if you understand what I mean. Meaning it's not that there's going to be lightning bolts coming out of the sky to vanquish the enemy, or he's not going to paralyze the enemy and allow you to come over. But God sort of nature gives you the spirit, the will. You can probably get back to a earlier thing, that will thing, to overcome your enemies. And that is sort of God-given. Is that. Now, I disagree with the author, and yes, I haven't read all of the original sources and whatnot. I've read the book completely. Because I think God, and again, what may be true in 1924 isn't true in 1944. And there's a malice aforethought in picking some of those dates. I truly believe that Hitler believed that there was a power, a supernatural power, looking out after him in particular, and not just his will to sort of Nietzschean Superman will to overcome. And the author goes way deep into Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and how they all influenced Hitler and all kinds of stuff. But the author, if you're interested in wanting to read it, it's a good book, Hitler's Religion. But I really believe that Hitler believes that there is more than just a nature is God, that there is a power, and it may not be a sort of anthropomorphic, meaning that is often anthropomorphism is giving human characteristics to non-human things. We most commonly see it in cartoons in which a rabbit talks and acts very much like a human. I would contend, and without getting into, that's what a lot of people do with gods. And I use that term plural, whether it's a Zeus or a Yahweh or whatever. They try to put human characteristics on whatever gods may be. So I am not trying to say that there is a physical being somewhere that Hitler believed in. Again, I'm talking about what Hitler believes in here. That a physical being that Hitler believes in is giving magical intervention to him. But I do believe that he believes there is a thinking, purposeful, super support protecting him personally. Now, he might not have believed that in 1924 when he's in Landsberg prison. I believe that's the year that he's mostly in prison. He gets out in 24 or whatever, but that's sort of why I use that. Things look sort of bleak then. I definitely think he believes that by 1944, after that final assassination attempt, that he survives. But he also survives many previous assassination attempts. Often aren't nearly as close calls, meaning like a bullet just barely missing him. But I do think he sort of thinks that he's blessed. And we do have fairly good evidence, I almost said no, but fairly good evidence that Hitler was reading Astara, which is an occultist magazine, in Vienna before he moves to Munich in Germany. So he has an occultist background. Now you can read a magazine. I can read a Muslim magazine and not be a Muslim. I'll totally grant you that. But according to the story and the author, some of this stuff comes out, I think. Well, no, some of the stuff is out is when after Hitler comes to power, so there may be a little bit of retcon there, you know. But I think I'm going with it. I believe the author, and though of the star, and I forget, and he survives the war and continues being published and doing things post World War II, interviewed on television and whatnot, and claims a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know that I believe everything, and he's not the most credible witness. But to the point is that supposedly Hitler, you know, at that time living in Vienna, shows up at his residence trying to buy back issues of the Astara magazine that he didn't have. So I'm believing it. I'm choosing to believe it now. There's some evidence for it. It does seem a reasonable story. So I'm going with I'm believing it. Until somebody gives me some good reason to poke a hole in it, then I'll discredit it. But until that point, I'm going with it. You don't normally show up at the, you know, it's sort of a self-published magazine, A Star, and it's on a bunch of newsstands. But so it's not a huge major concern. But it is a monthly magazine or something, weekly, I don't know. You know, if you're not highly interested in the subject, you normally don't show up at its headquarters, even if it's a local, you know, headquarters. You know, I probably would have showed up at Paradox at least once if I lived in Stockholm. Now, I don't know if they would have either hired me or called the police, and we can't have, you know, fans coming knocking on our door stalking us. Again, I don't think I would be the Sheldon Cooper of Paradox or anything like that. A few of you'll get the reference, but you know, I would have at least at one point or another showed up, and they have, you know, the Paradox conventions or something. I'm very well, you know, so if it's easy for me to travel, I would have showed up at a Paradox once, because obviously I'm playing thousands and thousands of hours of Paradox games. But if I spend 10 minutes playing some game that I don't like, doesn't mean that I'm a big supporter of that game. So that's sort of why I'm going that early on, Hitler has, I think, more occultist influences. Now, that doesn't mean he believes everything he reads, and, you know, because sometimes these occult type magazines have, including in the same issue, two different authors arguing with each other, saying that two different things are true. So they're not, you know, necessarily a unified thing. So I do also think that he's more occult influence than this author, him personally. But National Socialism, we look at Robert Ley, Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Hess, we can go into Rosenberg, you know, on and on and on, including this Wetzel character, are very much occultists, and Hitler clearly does say that he doesn't want, and I believe it, he doesn't want to try to form a new religious ritual practices, but Himmler does. And so I look at what would become, you know, what would have National Socialism become in time, and I think it would have become more and more. Oh, and Hitler is very clear that National Socialism and Christianity are ultimately are incompatible, ultimately. Now, Hitler very much takes the position that he wants the Christians to die off. Again, not in a concentration camp, just of old age, and I'm talking mostly about Germans, because he one time talks about his mother, who was a devout, I gather, Catholic or something, and if she was still alive, he wouldn't persecute her or people like her, but eventually they're going to be the old folk and going to die off. He's going to very much, and you can see this very much in the book, Hitler's compromises, but very much how he has his big, huge programs in getting the youth and re-educating the youth through the Hitler Youth. And so that is how he's ultimately going to change Germany. And I think that there is enough occult elements even being pushed into the Hitler Youth that is where National Socialism was going to be. And, you know, how do I put this? Even if you're being successful, there's a lot of stress being at the top of something like Germany or the presidency. We can see that in U.S. presidents, how quickly they go gray-haired, how for fairly young Obama is to this day, how much gray hair he has. And you can look at his wife, who doesn't have all the pressures of making all those decisions, and how she still looks much younger, much closer to her age, shall we say. So being that sort of major leader, especially going through World War II, even if you're being successful, which I would say success would equal Obama's presidency, but you know, as opposed to being, you know, conquered by everybody, you're not going to live as long. You die off sooner. So people were going to take over after Hitler, and when you look at all of the influences around the thing, and this is like Hitler in one of his meetings or talks with Mussolini warns Mussolini that the Catholics have too much, the Catholic Church, I should say, has too much influence in the fascist government. And Mussolini asks, well, how should I deal with this? I don't personally think, though somebody may correct me, that Mussolini is an anti-Catholic, but he does have a socialist background, and I don't know. I don't know that he wants to destroy the Catholic Church. I would be surprised if he does, but he might very well want to limit its influence. And, well, Hitler says, well, I have no Christians around me, or something, or there's no basically all of Hitler's entourage is no Christians. And so he nobody who's close to him, part of his entourage, including a lot of his military staff, I'm talking, military, depending on the war and who's getting put in, Stauffenberg, part of his entourage, not really, but sort of what I'm talking about, his sort of inner circle, his intimates. None of them are Christian. Now, not that they're necessarily occultists either, because there's a bunch of atheists within that, and there are a bunch of these sort of pantheists, and you can look at that stuff. But Hitler de-Christianifies his inner circle fairly early on. So Hitler and Christianity, Hitler is no Christian. Hitler believes in a God, a power, in whatever. I don't know if he believes in a multiplicity of them, and this is where the author wants to paint Hitler as being a scientific anti-Semite. I think there's more to his anti-Semitism than just scientific racism. But he does often appeal publicly to scientific racism himself, as well as various Nazi things publicly. And so, which is different than in private. So, very much that. Okay, we're going to end the episode here. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you for liking the episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to hear more of my rattling on about different books that I've read and my analysis of them. And, of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, corrections. If you have a different viewpoint on this, post it. Just be friendly. And I will respond with what I think about it. And we can just leave it there. If you're going to state something, I'm going to either agree, disagree, or go, well, whatever. But, it doesn't, then let future readers decide who they like, what they like, and maybe it be somewhere between us, But so please post. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.